is she, Daniel? Some shadow advisor you've kept under wraps until the 11th hour? Or just a pretty face hired to pacify that old curmudgeon? Blackwood, Ms. Victoria Chen's skeptical, slightly contemptuous question, coming from the sharp-witted chief financial officer, cracked like a whip through the already taut atmosphere of the strategy room right after Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, or rather, Dr. Evelyn Reed, had made her surprising and impressive entrance. As if the pressure from the billion-dollar merger and the scrutinizing eyes of the entire executive board weren't enough, Daniel Harrison now faced suspicion about the fake wife he had audaciously brought into the battle. The luxurious yet suffocating air in Harrison Global's headquarters seemed to freeze everyone waiting to see how the brilliant CEO would navigate this awkward and dramatic predicament. The entire future of Harrison Global, the brainchild I've poured my sweat and tears into building for 3 decades, is riding on this 2-day strategy meeting. But ironically, what's making my palms slick with cold sweat right now isn't the complex figures in the multi-billion-dollar merger plan, nor the tough questions from potential partners, but the scrutinizing, doubtful eyes of Arthur Blackwood, our esteemed chairman of the board, and the entire executive team, all fixed on the wife I just created in a mere 48 hours. Daniel Dan Harrison subtly tightened his navy blue silk tie, feeling the distinct invisible weight pressing down on his shoulders. This strategy meeting was critical. Harrison Global, a long-established tech conglomerate, was on the verge of a golden opportunity, a merger with Innovatech Solutions, a dynamic startup boasting breakthrough technologies. If successful, this would be a historic turning point, propelling Harrison Global back to industry leadership. But Dan's executive board, a group of older, seasoned directors who were also deeply conservative, were extremely cautious and somewhat skeptical of his ability to steer this massive ship through stormy waters, especially after his rather messy divorce nearly a year ago. They worried he lacked the necessary stability, both psychologically and in terms of personal image, to make sound decisions in such a decisive deal. There were even hushed rumors internally that their counterparts at Innovatech Solutions, or perhaps Mr. Arthur Blackwood himself, known for his traditional views, wanted to see a stable family image from Dan as a soft factor to build trust before signing on the dotted line. The pressure was immense, and in a moment of desperation with time running short, Dan had made a reckless decision, a gamble he wasn't sure he could win. He would hire a woman to play his wife, not just to appear by his side at social dinners, but to participate in part of this strategy meeting, posing as a family shareholder with deep insights into the company's operations, or a spouse and informal advisor he regularly consulted. The meeting was unfolding in the largest conference room at Harrison Global headquarters, a luxurious space thick with tension. Dan stood in the middle of the room presenting the key points of the merger strategy, trying to keep his voice calm and confident. But he was repeatedly met with razor-sharp interrogations from Mr. Blackwood, the silver-haired chairman with shrewd eyes, and Ms. Victoria Chen, the CFO, renowned for her meticulous attention to every number. Other board members also looked doubtful, their brows furrowed and soft, incessant whispers filled the air. Sitting quietly beside Dan in the seat reserved for the CEO's wife was Dr. Evelyn Evie Reed. In her role as Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, Dan's ex-wife's name, a detail agreed upon to enhance credibility. Evie looked incredibly composed and elegant. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray pantsuit that flattered her balanced figure. Her chestnut brown hair was neatly tied in a low professional bun. Thin-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, adding to her intellectual air. She listened silently occasionally, jotting notes in a small notebook, looking every bit the wise, discreet CEO's wife, who quietly supported her husband from the sidelines. No one, not even Dan, could have guessed her true performance was about to begin. Just as the meeting seemed to hit a stalemate, when an incredibly thorny question from Ms. Chen about market risk analysis in a worst-case scenario left Dan slightly flustered, unable to find an immediate satisfactory answer, Evie unexpectedly spoke up. With the chairman's and director's permission, Evie's voice cut through the tense silence, calm, clear, and confident. Regarding the market risk Ms. Chen just raised and the concerns about the financial model's viability amidst macroeconomic volatility, I have some supplementary analysis based on an econometric forecasting model I've recently studied in depth, as well as some historical data from similar mergers in the industry. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the woman who had just spoken. Mr. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Ms. Chen looked skeptical. Dan, too, was stunned. Before anyone could recover, Evie slowly stood up and walked to the large whiteboard at the head of the room. With a few swift movements, she connected her laptop to the projector. And then a series of complex yet incredibly coherent, logical and scientifically presented charts, figures, and analyses appeared on the screen. She began her presentation. Her voice remained calm and composed, but every word, every point she made was sharp, concise, and utterly persuasive. She delved deep into potential risk factors, proposed contingency plans, cited reputable academic studies, and drew comparisons with past successes and failures. She not only answered Ms. Chen's question, but expanded on the issue, pointing out hidden opportunities that even Harrison Global's strategy team hadn't considered. She used industry jargon precisely, confidently, without a hint of hesitation. The board members went from stunned to surprised, then astounded, and finally completely won over. They couldn't believe that Mrs. Harrison, the woman they had assumed was merely an accessory for Dan at this meeting, possessed such a formidable strategic mind and terrifying expertise. Mr. Blackwood, the difficult chairman, listened intently to every word, occasionally nodding in approval. Ms. Chen, after a few attempts to probe further and find flaws in Evie's analysis, only to be convincingly refuted by solid arguments and irrefutable data, finally fell silent, her eyes showing clear admiration and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. The other board members whispered among themselves, their gazes fixed on Evie with admiration and curiosity. Who was this woman? How had they never heard of such a talented Mrs. Harrison? Dan Harrison stood beside her just as shocked as everyone else. He knew Evie was intelligent, her resume had shown that. But he never imagined she possessed such in-depth knowledge, stage presence, and top-tier analytical and presentation skills. She wasn't just acting the part of a wise wife, she was genuinely a leading expert. He looked at his fake wife with entirely new eyes, a mixture of utter amazement, boundless gratitude, and an indescribable sense of pride. This unexpected conquest completely changed the dynamics of the meeting, and perhaps it would also change the lives of Daniel Harrison and Dr. Evelyn Reed in ways they could never have imagined. A few weeks before the fateful strategy meeting, Daniel Harrison was facing one of the biggest challenges of his career. The merger plan with Innovatech Solutions, if successful, would be a powerful boost, returning Harrison Global to its dominant position in the tech market. But convincing the board of directors, especially the conservative and skeptical members, and impressing Innovatech's leadership was no easy feat. Dan's personal situation added to the complexity. His not-so-amicable divorce from Eleanor nearly a year ago had left a trail of gossip and doubts about his focus and psychological stability. Mr. Arthur Blackwood, the respected but notoriously difficult chairman, had more than once subtly advised Daniel, "I have full confidence in your leadership abilities. But in deals of this magnitude, our partners and we ourselves want to see a comprehensive commitment, a strong home front from the captain. Show us you're in complete control of everything, not just at work, but in your personal life as well." Dan understood the subtext. He needed a boost, something to fully regain the board's trust and project a perfect image to their partners. The idea of a wife who was not only beautiful and elegant for social events, but also intelligent, sharp, and capable of discreetly supporting him professionally to a certain extent to add credibility began to form in his mind. A crazy idea, but perhaps the only one at that moment. Dan didn't want to resort to typical matchmaking or escort agencies. He needed someone with real capabilities with depth. Through Veritas Consulting, a high-end HR consultancy Harrison Global frequently used for special projects, Dan put out an incredibly unique and confidential recruitment request. Find a highly educated woman, preferably in economics, finance, or business strategy, with excellent analytical and presentation skills and an attractive, elegant appearance. This person would play the role of his informal advisor and life partner for a series of upcoming important meetings and events under a short-term contract with a very generous remuneration. Confidentiality of personal information for both parties was paramount. After several days of meticulous searching and screening, Veritas Consulting sent Dan a single profile they deemed perfectly suited to his stringent criteria, Dr. Evelyn Evie Reed. Her resume was incredibly impressive. PhD in economics, graduated with honors from Harvard University. Former senior lecturer in Stanford's economics department, author of numerous valuable research papers on market strategy, risk management, and applied econometrics. She also had consulting experience with a few major corporations. However, what slightly surprised Dan was the note, current status on sabbatical and seeking new challenges, after declining a full-time offer from a top Wall Street investment fund to focus on an independent personal research project. The accompanying portrait showed a woman in her late 30s with an intellectual, elegant beauty. Her hazel eyes were intelligent, glinting with astuteness and a hint of detachment. Her smile was gentle, reserved. The real reason a woman as talented and highly qualified as Dr. Evelyn Reed would accept such a peculiar job would gradually be revealed. She was nurturing a deeply passionate independent research project on the impact of artificial intelligence on the global labor market structure, a project requiring substantial funding around $70,000 for data collection, hiring associates, and publication. She didn't want to be tied down by traditional funding organizations, wanting to maintain absolute independence in her research. The offer from Veritas Consulting with a $50,000 fee for a project lasting only a few days came as an unbeatable opportunity. Moreover, Evie also found it an interesting intellectual challenge, a chance to apply her knowledge and skills in a dramatic real-world situation, and also a way to observe the corporate world from a unique perspective. The direct interview between Dan and Evie took place in a private, highly secured meeting room. Dan was immediately impressed by Evie's intelligence, sharpness, confidence, and her ability to analyze problems logically and clearly. She showed no hesitation or timidity in the face of his difficult questions. Conversely, Evie recognized Dan Harrison as a CEO with strategic vision, a true leader, but one facing unnecessary, non-professional obstacles. She sensed the tension and a hint of loneliness in his eyes. They quickly reached an agreement. Evie would play Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, the wise wife life partner, and also the silent right-hand woman. Dan frequently consulted on important business strategy matters, a perfect cover to explain her presence and statements in meetings. Dan provided Evie with all confidential documents related to the Innovatech Solutions merger, detailed financial reports, market analyses, partner profiles, and even predictions of questions and challenges that might arise during the meeting. They had 3 incredibly intense and productive joint work sessions held secretly at a neutral location for Evie to grasp the entire situation and prepare for her role as thoroughly as possible. And Evie did not disappoint Dan. She didn't just memorize a script. She genuinely dived into analyzing the issues with all the passion and expertise of a scholar. She asked sharp questions, pointed out weaknesses in Dan's plan, offered profound insights, and even helped him adjust some crucial points in his presentation strategy. Dan grew increasingly astonished and admired her talent and dedication. They agreed that during meetings, Evie would only intervene when absolutely necessary, when Dan struggled with tough questions, or when there were in-depth issues she could handle better. No romantic elements were mentioned or expressed during the preparation. This was purely a work contract based on professionalism, mutual trust in each other's abilities, and a common goal to help Daniel Harrison succeed in the deal of the century. But fate sometimes has more surprising and interesting arrangements than humans can ever calculate. Back to the tense atmosphere of the strategy meeting at Harrison Global headquarters. After Dr. Evelyn Reed's surprising and impressive debut as Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, the meeting continued with a completely new dynamic. Initially, the board members, especially Mr. Blackwood and Ms. Chen, still harbored some skepticism and a watchful attitude towards the CEO's wife. They weren't sure if her recent sharp statements were just meticulous preparation, an elaborately staged act, or genuine innate talent. But Evie, in her pre-agreed role as the silent advisor, did not disappoint. She didn't try to be the center of attention or overshadow Dan. Instead, she skillfully stepped back slightly, yet always remained there like a steadfast anchor for her husband. At crucial moments when Dan seemed a bit flustered by a difficult question, or when discussions threatened to reach an impasse, Evie would gently offer subtle suggestions. Intelligent, guiding questions helping Dan regain his confidence and present his arguments more coherently and persuasively. When representatives from Innovatech Solutions' young and dynamic tech experts posed very specific and complex questions about the financial structure of the merger and the potential risks of integrating 2 different technology platforms, Evie, after a discreet nod from Dan, once again stood up. This time, she not only used econometric analysis, but also demonstrated an astonishing understanding of the latest tech trends and the challenges and opportunities in building an integrated tech ecosystem. She used technical jargon, accurately cited real-world examples from leading global tech corporations, and outlined an ambitious yet feasible vision for the future of Harrison Innovatech. The young managers from Innovatech Solutions, who had initially somewhat dismissed the CEO's wife, now looked at her with entirely different eyes full of respect and admiration. Ms. Victoria Chen, the CFO, known for her caution and scrutiny of every number, relentlessly posed tough questions about risk scenarios, expected ROI, cash flow, and capital efficiency. She wanted to be certain this deal wasn't a reckless gamble. And once again, Evie, with her solid economic knowledge and a scholar's sharp analytical skills, responded brilliantly. She not only answered Ms. Chen's questions in detail, but also proactively proposed effective risk management solutions and profit optimization strategies that even Harrison Global's finance team hadn't considered. Mr. Arthur Blackwood, the esteemed chairman who had initially been the most skeptical, was now completely convinced. He no longer observed silently, but began to directly ask Evie strategic questions, testing her knowledge, mettle, and vision. Evie didn't flinch. She answered respectfully, calmly, but each answer contained solid arguments, profound analysis, and unshakable confidence. Gradually, the atmosphere in the room completely transformed. The initial tension and suspicion were replaced by intense concentration, unconcealed admiration, and even a touch of astonishment. Mrs. Eleanor Harrison was not merely a beautiful, elegant wife behind her husband's success. She was truly an extraordinary strategic mind, a rare talent. During the break between sessions, board members began to whisper amongst themselves not about the risks of the deal, but about the incredibly impressive CEO's wife. They couldn't believe Daniel Harrison had such a beautiful and brilliant partner. Many secretly thought their concerns about Dan's instability after the divorce were entirely unfounded. With a woman like this by his side, how could Dan not succeed? Daniel Harrison clearly felt the shift in everyone's attitude. He not only felt immensely grateful to Evie for saving him in this crucial meeting, but also began to feel genuine admiration, a deep respect for her talent, courage, and intellect. He realized Evie wasn't just a fake wife, hired to act. She was truly a partner, a companion he could completely trust and rely on. There were moments amidst the intense debates when Dan and Evie's eyes met. An astonishing rapport, an unspoken understanding that needed no words. It seemed an invisible chemistry, a special connection was developing between them, something far beyond the scope of a mere work contract. The 2-day strategy meeting finally concluded, and the result was spectacular. Thanks to Evie's powerful support, sharp analysis, and extraordinary persuasiveness, Daniel Harrison successfully convinced both Harrison Global's board and Innovatech Solutions leadership to approve the ambitious merger plan, a historic victory for Harrison Global. Mr. Arthur Blackwood, in his closing remarks, didn't hesitate to offer special praise for Mrs. Eleanor Harrison. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 2 days, we have not only witnessed CEO Daniel Harrison's outstanding leadership and strategic vision, but also admired the wisdom, astuteness, and composure of his wife, Mrs. Evelyn. No, Mrs. Eleanor Harrison. Mr. Blackwood fumbled slightly with the name, but quickly corrected himself. I am completely confident that with such strong support and a talented partner, Harrison Global, under Daniel Harrison's leadership, will achieve even greater success in the future. Evie merely smiled modestly, a gentle yet captivating smile. Dan looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude, admiration, and a new warm emotion, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. After all the board members and Innovatech representatives had departed, only Daniel Harrison and Dr. Evelyn Reed remained in the large conference room where the intense battle had just taken place. The air suddenly became quiet and somewhat awkward. The role was over. They were no longer Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, but Daniel Harrison, the powerful CEO, and Dr. Evelyn Reed, the talented scientist. I really don't know what to say to thank you, Evie. Dan broke the silence first, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. You did so much more than I could have ever imagined or hoped for. You didn't just salvage this meeting, you truly conquered them all. You are an extraordinary person. Evie smiled gently, a soft smile that melted away the usual seriousness of a scholar. It was an incredibly interesting intellectual challenge, Daniel, and I'm very glad I could contribute a small part to your great success today. They began to talk more openly, no longer maintaining the distance of a CEO and a contract partner. They discussed the events of the past 2 days, the breathtakingly tense moments, the surprising reactions of the board members. The initial professionalism and somewhat detached demeanor gradually gave way to closeness, understanding, and even a bit of teasing. Honestly, Evie said, her eyes twinkling with mischief, I was quite surprised to see Chairman Blackwood change his tune so quickly. At first I thought he was going to grill me relentlessly. Dan laughed. That's because you were too brilliant, Evie. Even an old fox like Arthur Blackwood had to concede to your intelligence and irrefutable arguments. As Evie gathered her documents preparing to leave, Dan suddenly stopped her. Evie, he said, his voice slightly hesitant, I know our contract ends here, and I've prepared the remaining payment along with an additional bonus as a special thank you for what you've done. He handed her a thick envelope. Evie took it but didn't open it immediately. She looked at Dan, waiting. But I was wondering, Dan continued, his eyes looking directly into Evie's a sincere and somewhat yearning gaze. If I could invite you to dinner, a real dinner, not as Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, but as Daniel Harrison and Dr. Evelyn Reed. So I can thank you properly, and perhaps, so we can talk more about things unrelated to work. Evie was surprised by Dan's unexpected invitation. She looked deeply into his eyes, saw an undeniable sincerity, and also a hint of anticipation. She too felt a certain attraction to this intelligent, decisive, and somewhat lonely man whom she had just helped overcome one of the biggest challenges of his career. She smiled a radiant and knowing smile. I think, Daniel, that's not a bad idea at all. Daniel Harrison and Dr. Evelyn Reed's first real dinner didn't take place at some glamorous high-end restaurant frequented by CEOs. Instead, Dan took Evie to a small, cozy, and somewhat old-fashioned Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet street in the West Village, a place Evie had casually mentioned she loved for its atmosphere and traditional dishes. Freed from work pressures and roles to play, they were completely themselves. They talked about everything under the sun, their favorite books, classical music that stirred their souls, travels to distant lands, passions, dreams, and even past failures and hurts. They discovered surprisingly many things in common, and a deep soul connection seemed to have long existed between these two seemingly disparate individuals. Dan was captivated by Evie's profound intellect, strong independence, and her subtle charm and witty humor. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. With her, he felt he could be himself without trying to appear strong or perfect. Evie, for her part, sensed the warmth, sincerity, and also the hidden wounds and yearning for happiness behind Daniel Harrison's somewhat cold, decisive exterior. He wasn't just a brilliant CEO, but also a man with a kind heart and a deep soul. Their feelings for each other blossomed naturally, effortlessly, like a refreshing stream flowing into the parched lands of their souls. A year later, at Harrison Global Corporation's annual shareholder meeting, Daniel Harrison, his face radiant with happiness and unprecedented confidence, stood proudly at the podium. Beside him was none other than Dr. Evelyn Reed Harrison, his real wife, life partner, trusted companion, and also the indispensable senior strategic advisor to the corporation. They had been married for 6 months, a small, cozy, and private wedding attended only by their closest loved ones, yet filled with love and happiness. Evie not only brought stability and joy to Dan's personal life, but also officially joined Harrison Global's strategic advisory board, contributing groundbreaking ideas and sharp analyses, helping the corporation grow stronger, especially after the resounding success of the Innovatech Solutions merger. Mr. Arthur Blackwood and Ms. Victoria Chen now harbored no doubts whatsoever. They fully trusted and admired the power couple, Daniel and Evelyn Harrison, who had proven that the combination of talent, intellect, and love could create wonders. Dan and Evie's story ended with them holding hands tightly, looking towards a bright, promising future for Harrison Global and for their own small family. A sweet testament that sometimes the most unexpected contracts, the most awkward roles, can lead to faded connections and a lasting, fulfilling happiness far beyond what one can ever plan or calculate. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.